Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast. This is a weekly program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, editor-in-chief of CraftsmanOnline.com, and the dust never settles for this guy, ever, because he's always on the go. We're happy to bring back in Brother Rene Perez for our special episode on Masonic travels. Welcome back to the podcast, Brother Rene.
Thank you, Michael. Always a pleasure to be here. Love it.
And we were talking about, Masonic traveling, and I was sharing with you how I think a lot of brothers, when we first get going into Masonry, so back to the EA, the fellow craft, and maybe just being a newly raised Master Mason, your world of what you understand Masonry and lodge meetings to be are of your home or mother lodge, as we would describe it. What made you kind of want to start getting outside of your lodge and seeing and visiting and traveling?
Yeah, so my lodge, the fifth district, when I first became a Master Mason, they used to talk about something called the Passport series. And it's a beautiful program. So what it is that they give you a little small passport for your district, and it gives you an opportunity to visit other lodges who's doing lectures in your district. So what the Passport series is you go and travel to different lodges. There's one in Long Island, and you get it stamped. So if you can fill out that little passport, you get a pin.
That's all it was.
That's what it was. Yes, that's all it was. And what I found was, for me, I used to see other brothers traveling. I saw a lot of brothers on my from Facebook who would travel to different lodges, and so that was one of the first opportunity that I had, and great experience meeting brothers just from everywhere. Meeting authors, and I've met what's his name? He does the show on Earth, America on Earth.
Walters, right, Brother Walters?
Scott Walter. Yep, Scott Walter. Yep, that's his name.
It's interesting, hearing you talk about the Masonic Passport. So I'm a member, my mother lodge is in the Old 17th in upstate New York. We have 17 lodges, kind of a big deal. It would probably take, I would say a year conservatively if you went out to visit, because we meet twice a month. So it's possible to go visit all 17, get them all stamped by the secretary, signed by the worshipful master. You get your little book. Mm-hmm. Well, you're a member of George Washington Lodge, number 285 in New York City. You get to meet in the Grand Lodge building. So that's probably not a hard task to go visit other lodges when they're all in your same building.
Well, there's one in, I forgot where, I think it's Freeport. It's on Long Island. It's in the same district. So I traveled out there, and it was James Gregg. I think it was James. Not many people could have traveled that far.
Gotcha.
But I went and I traveled, and I got that one stamped. So yeah. You're right. Most of the lodges from Fifth District do meet at the Grand Lodge, so it was kind of easy.
And that's a great warm up for those listening. Like, how do we begin the traveling process? I would say, if you're newly raised in the craft, go with brothers and they say, hey, we're going to go watch a degree or to a table lodge or to this other meeting to see a speaker for a program. Go with them. Makes it so much easier when you have somebody vouch for you. And then the unknown isn't so scary anymore. I want to get to where you made the first, travel outside of the jurisdiction, outside of New York State.
Sure.
Where did you go, and what led you to want to make that trip?
We have a tradition where every time we do a degree, for a second degree, we go to different states and we perform those degrees at the Grand Lodges. That was actually started for me. So when I first became a Mason, they did it in Fredericksburg.
Wow.
At the George Washington, when George Washington was initiated. And we would stay on a Friday and perform degree on a Saturday. It was so great because you get to eat with the brothers and hang out and just move around and visit these beautiful, Masonic sites that's over there. It's very Masonic in Virginia. As you know, I think you're all close by Virginia, close by DC. And we did it in Philadelphia, the Grand Lodge of Philadelphia. We did it in Boston. So that is what actually started. So the furthest I've ever went, the question was recently was in Puerto Rico. Yeah, that was the furthest lodge, as for me, out of the country.
Yeah.
Was went to visiting one of the lodges in Puerto Rico.
Let's talk about that because it was really neat. I love following you on Facebook for your photos. You take great pictures. One, you get a chance to visit a lot of things. I get to kind of live and travel with you vicariously through thanks to Facebook. And when you went to Puerto Rico and were putting up the pictures of the lodges, that had a Masonic meaning to you, but it also had a personal meaning to you. Tell us about that.
Sure. So, as most people know, I'm born here, but my parents are from Puerto Rico. And, my dad is buried in Puerto Rico. So two things that I always wanted to do was visit some family, of course, and of course, I brought my girlfriend and her sister came. They never experienced the island before like that. So two things I wanted to do was visit my dad for his birthday, and for my birthday, we were both in the same month, and visit family. And one thing that was personal for me was I was on a quest to see if I can find family members of mine from both sides who are actually Masons. And you could do that if you visit the Grand Lodge and you go into the archives. And that was one of the personal journeys for me to find. And when I went, of course, I contact one of the lodges because I was close by. What I was staying at was maybe, I don't know, 30 minutes probably by driving. And it was actually one of the oldest lodges. It's the mother lodge of the Grand Lodge in Puerto Rico that is in San Juan. And I didn't know that when I went. So it was pretty much like everything was like in synchronized. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And what was interesting and was beautiful was I met some brothers in Philadelphia, and one of them booked the same flight that I was going to Puerto Rico. And I said, hey, look, if you want, and he speaks Spanish, of course. I said, look, if you want to, you can come. I'm visiting a lodge in a town called Mayagüez. And I said, really? He said, really? I said, yeah, look, come, you can experience the Masonic experience that I'm the first time experience. And he brought another brother with him, and they had a great time. I mean, this lodge was just so amazing to be there, especially. I mean, I know a lot of brothers in Puerto Rico because I used to go in Zoom meetings with them. And ahead of time, I've contacted them, and they celebrate 136 years of Masonry over there.
I was invited, and it was one of the nights I wish that I would have made the drive. I was invited here to visit a Spanish-speaking lodge in Maryland that was doing a degree. And I didn't work, you know how life is. The conflict came up. I'm like, oh, that's going to be a tough one to get there and then get home later in the evening. For brothers that haven't gotten a chance to visit a lodge that speaks what we would not English, it's a foreign speaking lodge. What are the differences between Spanish Masonry and ritual versus what you would experience at George Washington Lodge?
We do have a Spanish speaking lodge at the Grand Lodge. It's called La Fraternidad. There's actually another one, I forgot the name, and there's another lodge that's working on it. They just got their charter called Juan Pablo Duarte Lodge. He was it's a Dominican lodge. They just got their charter for it. But the difference, I would say, well, in New York, the difference would be just the language. They do everything here because I know in New York, they have to do it they could do it their own way, but the only difference is that is in Spanish. There really is no difference. Now, when you go out to the Caribbean, they practice more of I believe a York Rite Masonry, because they wear red aprons while we wear bluish. And some of the words are different. Some of the rituals are different. They're the way they honor you, like when you go visit a lodge, they bring you in front of the lodge to give you a pin. It's very different the way they do it. I wish I can explain it, but I can't because it's more of a open thing. I wish I could say more to it, but there is a lot of differences when you visit a lodge out of the United States into a Spanish lodge. Very different, extremely different, and way more esoteric.
Every brother that I've spoken to, especially in the Spanish culture, Freemasonry, not that it doesn't have a deep meaning here in America or in English speaking lodges, but it goes a lot deeper. And kind of for the reasons that you talked about, that, those are more closed reasons we can't have in an open conversation. I did want to ask this, like, even though you fluently speak Spanish, you're Puerto Rican, when you went to the lodge, were there any parts where they were speaking where you were like, what did they just say? Were you able to follow along?
Well, I'm not as fluent, but the what's interesting is that the way they speak in Puerto Rico is very little different. It's a little bit more, what's the term I would say, articulate in a way. So yes, there was a lot of big words, and the good thing was that my friend that from Philadelphia, he's from Panama. So he kind of understood it.
Gotcha. That actually makes me feel better.
Yeah, but they speak English,
right? Well, but as a Mason, we should be able to follow along and know, oh, this is that part of the ritual. But it's kind of reassuring to know that there were questions that you had, that you were thankful that you had a trusted friend next to you that could kind of fill it in for you.
Exactly. Yeah. One thing I would say, the way they do it there, which was a little. I was kind of shocked about it, but they read from the book. Yeah.
Interesting. Not a lot of memorization. Yeah,
but you get to read it with not many members. Like, we don't do that, but they read. They read from it.
Interesting.
So that was the only interesting part.
Now,
but they speak English actually.
That is
they speak English.
That's also interesting. One thing that when we first logged on, and our listeners don't get to see us doing this conversation, but I saw your background on your phone, and I was like, whoa, we got to talk about this. I know that you made the travels to Puerto Rico. What also caught my eye was earlier, I would say like in the spring, maybe it was, you got out to New Mexico. What led you to traveling out to New Mexico? And then you got to tell us why you have the Arizona Freemason background.
Oh, of course. So I have some great friends in New Mexico. We like to trip out there because we like to go to Santa Fe. And usually one of the good friends of mine, he lives in Los Lunas, New Mexico. So I bring my girlfriend with me, and we go over there. We just travel. We just look at, and since I'm a Mason, I like to visit lodges when I go travel there. And it was a few lodges. I visit the Grand Lodge of New Mexico and the Grand Library. It wasn't a lot to see there. It's not like the Grand Lodge. It was very small, so I was a little shocked about it. But it was a great lodge. They do have interesting artifacts there. The lodge that I visit in Belen, New Mexico, which is it's like maybe 15 minutes from Los Lunas. It's south from Santa Fe. It's like 2 hours. That was a small lodge. It was just a regular, very small. They had to do a few paintings and construction stuff there, but that was a beautiful trip. Now, the background that I have is a good friend of mine. His name is Antonio Cubrietti. He will be the past master of Pure Lodge in Arizona. Very good friend of mine. How I met him is very interesting because a friend of mine named Briggs, who has his own show called Unknown Philosopher, told me to do a lecture for Anthony for PR Lodge. But it turns out Anthony is originally from New York. And we know the same people. And it's weird how Masonry is. Like, in Masonry, is a small world. Masonry is like a big word, but everyone knows each other in Masonry. So, and we know the same people. And this is his painting. He paints and he draws. Great. He's one of the greatest artists that I've seen before.
Looking at your picture, I grew up in Arizona. I identified the state outline of Arizona immediately, but it was the southwestern style art with the colors and the square and compasses. Immediately I'm like, did he visit the Grand Lodge of Arizona and not put pictures up of that? That's something I'd like to see as well.
Not yet.
So I want to get a little into, for those that are preparing maybe to travel for the first time outside of their state or outside their jurisdiction, kind of get them prepared. I mentally knew when I relocated to DC that the ritual would be different. The experience would be different, at least going to a lodge with the degrees or maybe the opening and closing. But I could also say this is that is where the only differences exist. Each lodge, no matter if it's, in New York State, your lodge is going to be a little different than mine. They all have their own little characteristics or personality that's in them, and also culture, I would say. But the other cool thing is that once we get to talking about Freemasonry, it doesn't matter if you got your degrees in Arizona, New Mexico, Puerto Rico, where it's that experience that we can all share and talk about. But for brothers that are getting ready to walk into a lodge for the first time, what are some things that you would share with them so they could be mentally prepared?
When I first visit Pennsylvania, it's the first time I visit Pennsylvania, the EA degree. And when I went, I just wanted to know, because apparently they're one of the oldest, right? They were from 1731. And I would say that, don't expect it to be the same as what, like you said before, not every jurisdiction, different jurisdictions do different. They do it differently. And my friend, I have a friend in Philadelphia. He was, I vouched for him. I kind of sponsored for him. And I told him how to join the lodge there. And I went to witness his degree. And I was shocked at how different it was. I was shocked how short it was. It was extremely short. And it's surprising because it's Pennsylvania, right? But it was extremely short. So I would say that don't expect it to be the same as the way that you think it's going to be for your jurisdiction. But prepare yourself because they do things a little I don't know if I can say this or not, but one of the reflections that we have, and now when you get your EA degree, they don't have that for there. They don't have it there. They don't have something you can, alone to be alone. Not many jurisdictions do that or add that. But I was shocked about that part there, But it's beautiful. Every time we get an EA brother to come and join our lodge, I tell them, go and travel. Once you get your third degree, travel, because you meet beautiful people from everywhere. It's just beautiful to travel and bond and network with different brothers. And that's what makes Masonry so beautiful and so great.
Yeah, and that's a solid point where you said, just be prepared for things to be a little different. It got me thinking back to the first time that I traveled outside of New York State. My mother lodge, St. George's No. 6 in Schenectady, our sister lodge, St. Francisville Lodge in St. Francisville, Louisiana. We go down, we send a contingency of brothers to go down and participate in a Civil War reenactment that they do for the day that the war stopped, which that created the tie between the two lodges, where a brother from New York passed away during the Civil War and now is buried in the Southern Church. And I'm not doing it justice by giving the summary, but this is a completely other episode that we could probably have on this, which is really neat. But as I was going down there, I was trained as a Master Mason. What do we wear in New York State to our lodge meetings? Dark suit and tie. If you're an officer, usually in most jurisdictions, you wear a tuxedo. So I asked, as I'm packing my bag to go down, what are we going to be wearing to lodge? Oh, it's a little more relaxed down there. Oh, okay. So no tie? Actually, no dark suit. And don't wear long sleeves. Like, you can, a white polo shirt and shorts. You might even see guys in, like, flip-flops or jeans. Khaki pants would be appropriate. I'm like, wow. Well, here's why. When we go down there in New York, our Masonic year runs from September through May or June, usually. Most lodges in New York State do not meet during the summertime. Well, this lodge did in Louisiana. And it is hotter than you know what down in Louisiana in the summertime. So it would not be comfortable to even go from an air-conditioned car to an air-conditioned room. That brief time outside, you would literally sweat to death. So that was one thing that mentally I was like, oh, they don't wear a dark suit and tie. They don't. But it's okay. The other thing was I was standing outside the door, and one of the brothers from New York in my lodge said, you're about to walk in and see something that you're never going to see in another lodge, no matter where you go. Just, I want you to be ready for that. It's a little bit of a surprise. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what do they do? And I walked in, and what they had behind the treasurer's station was a ceiling to floor. There's like 4 known copies of this in the world, but the very famous portrait of George Washington, but it was actually the painted one. And of course, I geeked out and got my picture taken in front of it after the meeting. But the key thing was, and we could talk about this openly, is their room was situated the same way, but maybe just a little bit different than what I was used to seeing, and probably you would be used to seeing, where they would place the lesser lights and how they would be displayed. Right. And the one thing I would tell brothers is that it's entirely appropriate, but just find a polite way to do it, of course, after the meeting, to ask questions about the difference. And that's usually going to be the tip-off that you're from another jurisdiction. And they'll say, oh, well, how do you do this in your lodge? Oh, well, we do it this way, with the understanding that no one way is right, that there's no, we're universally the same, but also different in how we practice Freemasonry. So I think that was a very valid thing, is it just to mentally be prepared that it's not going to be the same experience in your lodge. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be better or worse. It's just going to be different, and I think in a good way.
It's funny you say that. When we when my lodge, we did a second degree in Philadelphia, there were some brothers from Pennsylvania. Philadelphia came to see the degree. And they were really impressed, considering they're old, but they were really impressed. They were like, wow, I've never seen a degree this. So like, it was long. It was great. A lot of them don't have, apparently is what I've heard, a middle chamber thing, and they're at a second degree. So it's for them, it's something that is just, they have to see. It's something that they have to see. And one thing I forgot to mention real quick, when I was in Puerto Rico, they do, like, I was taught here is never to cross the altar, but they do. It's very different. It's very, very different.
The master's carpet, huh?
A master's carpet, yeah. And they do it.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So we're having this conversation in mid-November. This episode for the brothers will get to hear it in early December. And usually, this end of the year time is when we start thinking about goals or things that we want to do in the next year. And 2021 was 2020 plus. It was just a little bit better, I would say. Yeah. And hopefully, as the world opens up and everybody feels safer, and we get through this health emergency, we can start to see the light at the other end of the tunnel. Just a couple quick things. Like, if we have brothers who are sitting here going, hey, you know what, next year, if it's safe to do so and I feel comfortable doing it, I'd like to travel a little bit more. For brothers in New York State that have never been down to New York City, you had mentioned a couple lodges, but what are some experiences in New York City that brothers upstate or out west could enjoy that you would recommend?
I would say, if there ever brothers from upstate, come and visit Garibaldi. I would recommend that. Their first degree. Very, very different. It's a beaut. I'm talking like every person from the state of Philadelphia, even from Boston, come down to New York just to see that degree. Even I met a brother who visited our lodge from Romania, wanted to see that degree. So I always recommend, when they come to the state of New York, visit Garibaldi when they do their first degree. I mean, all the degrees.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that. I'm going to add that to the show links, the Garibaldi Lodge link. Last night I was at a table lodge with brothers here, and in Maryland and DC and Virginia, they were all saying, oh, I want to go there, and they had all talked about that. So that's definitely, a gold star. That's one of the beautiful things. How about Livingston Library? Like, what? I'm sure you've spent some time in there as a book reader.
Yes. I have did a lecture.
What displays or things would you, if you only had 2 hours in New York City, you're down there on business or you're visiting, and you get a chance to go to the Grand Lodge building, where would you direct brothers to go?
I would say, go to the Livingston Library, go to the 6th floor, visit that George Washington statue. The Livingston Library, of course, is one of the greatest libraries that you could ever visit. They have a lot of artifacts. They have, actually, sometimes they change the artifacts. Like, they were changed sometimes, and they would change it. I remember, not years ago, I saw one of George Washington's, I think it was either his Bible that was there, then they took it back, but they usually change it. They have pictures of the movie with Sean Connery, that movie when he was a Mason back in the 70s.
Yeah, okay.
They have pictures in there. They have drawings of Angel Millar, one of the great Masonic authors. His paintings are displayed inside the Livingston Library.
Mm.
I will also say if they ever want to see lectures, visit the Livingston Library YouTube channel. Awesome lectures there. You have great speakers from all around. Even non-Masons do lectures on Livingston Library. That's another thing I would say. If they ever visit, to check to see if there's a lecture going on in Livingston Library so they can attend it. Now, because of the COVID restrictions, everything is due online.
You talked a little bit about the George Washington statue, and I think about this now, living in the DC area and working 2 blocks from the Capitol, and being able to see something like that, and it still has a meaning to me every day, even though you get in that mentality of, oh, I'm going to work today. What when you walk by the George Washington statue, what does it remind you of? What do you think of?
It reminds me of the father of Masonry. It reminds me of how how Masonry started. Because when I was a kid, the reason this is so that statue is very interesting to me. When I was years ago, I went to visit a park in Queens called the Flesh and Metal Park. It's right by the Met Stadium. If anyone is any brother, go visit this park. That same statue is there with the Masonic Square and Compass, and it's a huge, big statue. It's in the middle of the park. Yeah. 2 years ago, a year ago, I went to visit different lodges, and I kept seeing that same statue. There's a little small one in Boston. There's two in New York, the one in Grand Lodge, one in the park, and I believe there's one in Philadelphia.
That's very cool. All right. So there's a couple things that you can do outside even and throughout your travels. Good tips. Good tips. Last question, and this is where I wish that I was a member of GW Lodge, just because of the level of Masonic knowledge that the brothers possess, and the love for the craft that you guys have. What are these presentations like? How do you recap your travel? How do you share your journey with brothers at Lodge Night?
I have one about Knights Templars. In Puerto Rico, I will have to do it. The only issue with that is it would have to be in Spanish. And my Spanish is not. I was actually told to do one in Dominican Republic because I have a friend there for the Grand Lodge of Dominican Republic. He was actually going to pay for my hotel when I get my flight. But I had to do the presentation all in Spanish, But definitely I'll probably do it, try to discuss it on the history of the Grand Lodge of Puerto Rico. Most people don't know the history of the Grand Lodges in Puerto Rico. They don't know that at one point in Puerto Rico, Masons were getting killed and had to hide on the ground. The first Grand Master is buried in the Grand Lodge of Puerto Rico. Yeah, and he was jailed in the castle in Puerto Rico when the Spanish were ruled in I think it was 1870 or 1890, but he was jailed in that castle for being a Mason,
Where did the Grand Lodge of Puerto Rico get their charter or dispensation? Who did they connect with?
Before they got it from Cuba, but before that, the oldest that they found was in 1811, in the same town that I went to visit, one of the lodge, which is that same lodge, Maya West Lodge. But there was a French charter, there was a Spain, there were many lodges. But the first time they got, I think, it was from Cuba. But the first Grand Master got his degrees in Dominican Republic.
That's the beauty of Freemasonry, is where you see where the journey and the exploration out to quote unquote the new world, and where were you on the stop, so to speak, of the travels, and what was going on at that time in the world, and these men were still seeking to be Freemasons as they were exploring this unknown land, and meeting these new cultures and people, and that's some. I want to be there for that that presentation night.
It's also important to say this, that there is a brother, and I think he was in the 1800s. His name was just to point it out there. Most people won't know that he was a Mason, but he was the first man of color, because he was a Black Puerto Rican, and his name was Jose Celso Barbosa. But he was the first in the United States Mason to get a medical degree in the United States.
This has been the Craftsman Online Podcast. I want to thank my brother and guest for coming on this week, Brother Rene Perez. Always a wealth of Masonic light when you come to visit us. Thank you.
Thank you, brother, for having me.
If Masonic education is important to you, you can sign up for our email newsletter. That's at craftsmanonline.com. A reminder that new episodes of our podcast are available for download every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.